right, welcome back to the Wrestling with the Faith podcast, everyone, or welcome if this is your first time joining in, where we're just a group of, churchgoers, Christians, everyday people that take reading from each week and kind of look and apply what that means to the modern day life and to our lives with everything going on in the world today. My name is Evan. I'm joined as usual by Dave and Laurel and our editor Ben. And we also have a very special guest joining us this week, Dick Hardy, joining us from all the way from sunny Arizona, who is a member of our congregation here, Prince of Peace Lutheran Church in Westlake, Ohio. So Dick, thanks for joining us this week.
Thank you.
And so this week, we're going to be talking through Mark 1, 29 through 39. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere safe, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." So he traveled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons. All right, so that, I think, kind of breaking that up into two segments, I guess, would be one of Jesus going around healing, and then one of Jesus finding a solitary place to pray before heading out to preach. So if we want to start maybe talking through the first segment with Jesus healing many, which going through to heal many, I think applies to everything going on today with the pandemic. I know it's been interesting, even just throughout kind of some of the people I've talked with recently that, I mean, whether are Christian or not, with the different beliefs on whether you have Jesus healing people versus those that are more separating science and medicine from God, in which, I mean, I know I for one am not someone that necessarily believes in, I don't know if the term is Christian medicine, or where it's strictly God, where people don't get the vaccines, don't take medicines. I mean, I think, we have science, we have medical professionals for a reason. I think God has given everybody their unique gift. I mean, obviously there's a lot of schooling and everything. I mean, doctors have to go through 10 years, 20 years of school to get their degree and to learn everything. But there are some people that are cut out for that, and I know I'm not one of them. So I'll take that as my moment to say hats off to all of our medical professionals that are, especially in today's world, that are helping us get through all of this.
When I think about the passage, I kind of think about this idea of casting out demons, and that whole that miracle piece of it all, and so whenever I read that, I think about Jesus healing people, and then I think about the whole casting out of demons. And for me, it's much easier for my head to get around Jesus kind of healing people and forgiving them, and them going out and sin no more kind of piece. But this idea of casting out demons or that more kind of severe miracle, if you will, or that like big miracle where someone gets up and walks, has always been hard for me to kind of get my head around, especially as someone who, has been in science. And as you said, Evan, I think, God gives us all those abilities to understand. And this idea of science and religion coming together is, in my opinion, a very Christian idea. And so, but how do you, do that along with kind of the, that miracle piece where someone gets up and walks? And so I've always wrestled with that, but I think it's something that when I read, I think of that miraculous moment and what it must have been like for anybody who was there.
I mean, talking about miracles, I mean, especially for those from our home congregation that know my sister, is this year is her 30th anniversary from surviving brain cancer. So I mean that that in and of itself, I mean, I know that there's been a lot, and even now as we've been talking with doctors and stuff about various things that have still come up and affected her life, but the fact that you get through that when you're 5 years old, miracle of medicine and of faith.
Yeah, one of the wonderful things we have as Christians is this book we're reading from. Unlike any other religion, the Christian faith is really a documented history of our faith. And even books and writings outside of the Bible verify many, many, many of the things of the Bible. And then we have this as a history. A lot of religions have do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this. But we have the why. We have the story behind it. We have the justification for our faith. And when you talk about science and faith, I'm a scientist, and I've gone back and forth many times. My faith has wavered, my faith has strengthened, my faith has wavered. And I'm to the point where I now understand this whole argument. And I was reading recently C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. If you haven't read it, it's just a wonderful quick read on faith. And C.S. Lewis, back around the time of World War II, was a commentator on the radio. He was also an Oxford scholar. And he said he wasn't a believer in Christianity or in Jesus Christ. And he wasn't a believer because someone told him it was incompatible with modern science. And after a while, he realized the person who had told him that wasn't a scientist. He had just heard it. He had just accepted it. He had never looked into it himself. So he decided to look into it. He decided to study it. He decided to let the facts fall where they may. And he became one of the great Christian apologists of the 20th century. And so when people say that science doesn't jive with religion, or specifically with Christianity, you have to really ask them, have you really looked into it? Have you really studied it? And when you do study it, you find out that Christianity, among all the major religions, is the one that very, very closely mirrors what we understand as modern science. It's wonderful. And that's the journey I've been on. And it took me 77 years, to get there. And it's really wonderful to understand where your position is. You're not waffling around. And I understand when you talk about wrestling with your faith, that's what I've been doing, wrestling with my faith. I don't do that anymore. I pretty much have now settled on my faith. And because I've looked into it, I've studied it. And I continue to study it. I continue to read. The fellow who led up the Human Genome Project wasn't a Christian. He was a wonderful biologist and geneticist. And then he came to Christ because he looked at the evidence. He still believes in science, but science doesn't discount Christianity. And he's written a wonderful book. Many other scientists, Nobel Prize winners and so forth, are very, very strong people of Christian faith. But you have to wrestle with it. You have to do what you're doing here in your podcast. You have to study it. You can't skim over it. You have to really study it and learn it and listen and read and decide for yourself. And when you do, the evidence points back to Christianity. At least it has for me.
Has anybody seen the movie? I saw it when I was in youth group. We watched a movie called The Genesis Code. Anyone seen that? No. Okay. Basically this movie, there's this Christian guy, and see, it was a while ago I saw it. I can't remember the gist of it. But basically, to sum it up, this guy was questioning the Bible and how it would relate to science, and going back to the Big Bang and Genesis. Like, how does that? This is saying one thing, this is saying the other thing. But actually, what they came to the conclusion of, one biblical day was actually not exactly 24 hours. It was this period of time, I forget what it was. It was relative because the universe was expanding. A day, space is relative to time, and as space was expanding, a day wasn't as complicated. But this movie explained it really well, and it just meshed Genesis with the Big Bang Theory.
Yeah, I've always thought that was always difficult, but mostly only because I didn't think about it all that thoroughly. And I think, kind of like Dick said, I think the more you think about it and the more you kind of look at what each explains, I think one of the great quotes I have from, might even been from Tom Henderson, I'm not sure, but where we talked a little bit about science explains how the world works and how things work, and the Bible explains why.
Why? Yeah. Oh, and then why.
Yeah, and it's kind of like using a screwdriver to hit a nail in. You can do that, but it's better to use a hammer. So use them each for what they are, so you can really connect the dots. And that was, I thought, a really good explanation.
Yeah, one of the amazing things is that the creation story has been used as a way to set the arguments, pro and con, faith and science. And if you really look into it, the creation story, two creation stories in the Bible are very consistent with what we know as science today, modern science. And recently I had an opportunity to read a really neat little book. I don't know if you can see that. It's called The 7 Days That Divide the World. And when I saw that title, I said, I got to buy this. And what it's really talking about is the creation story, where non-believers will say, well, how can we believe, it's just myth, it's just a story. And believers say, no, it really describes what happened. And this whole concept of non-believers saying, well, we know it wasn't created in 7 days. That's crazy. There's a whole bunch of points in this book. What the salient point is this. When the Bible uses the term day, it's not necessarily talking about a 24-hour day. When we use the term day, we don't necessarily talk about a 24-hour day. And I'll give you an example. And this example appears in the Bible as well. And so the Bible refers to days in both ways. My dad used to say to me, back in my day, we did it this way. He didn't talk about a 24-hour day. He was talking about a period of time, a general reference in time. And the Bible actually talks about general reference in time in many places. So consequently, if you look at it that way, and you understand that this came before this, came before this, became before this, it's a wonderful story that mirrors what we know as modern science. If you look at my day versus your day as younger people, it's so easy. And it's just a wonderful book. And it's like lifting a veil. Oh, now I know. Now I understand. I have another comment about this chapter. Many places in Mark, Matthew, and Luke, they talk about Jesus's miracles. And I have 2 points. The first point is that I think many times the writers of these Gospels referenced these miracles because they pointed to the prophecy that the Messiah would do these miracles. And they're addressing the fulfillment of a prophecy. And the second thing I think it points to is the fact that these actually happened. They were documented. People saw this. You know, what do we use to document our history? To say, okay, well, the World War II didn't happen. Well, yeah, it happened. Did you read those articles? Did you read the people who wrote about it, who lived through it? This is so documented. This narrative of our Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, is a wonderful documented history. And it's not just the Bible. There are many, many writings outside the Bible, non-Christian writings, that tell these tales. And so many people, eyewitnesses. That's what we use in court today. That's how we verify what's real and what's not real. And the Christian faith has this wonderful, wonderful history that is eyewitnessed. And like some of the early Gospels, these people were alive when Jesus was alive. They knew him, they saw him. Now contrast that with Paul, and Jesus had been crucified and resurrected before Paul had his revelation and became one of the strong apostles. These people, Mark, Matthew, James, Peter, many of the writers of the New Testament were there. They were eyewitnesses. They saw this. They lived it. You know, so when we say, well, what's your background on the news today? Well, so-and-so. Cut over to so-and-so. They were there. Wow. Our book, the Bible, has it. So from those 2 points, it points towards the prophecy, and it's an eyewitness story. So I think that's that just bodes very well.
So I think we talked a few weeks ago about, can you imagine, it might have been a lot of weeks ago now, with COVID, everything falls, 1 week after the next. But we talked a little bit about Jesus in an earlier episode where we kind of talked about, him talking to the apostles and saying, that they weren't quite ready to hear the whole message yet. They were still trying to figure what he was even talking about. So you can imagine now they just see these miracles that that Jesus is doing. Now what are they thinking, right? And this idea of, could they really comprehend what they were really saying? And so kind of, as it unfolded, it was more and more incredible as time went by. And, ultimately, when Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead, and they had that piece. And so I wonder about I think I mentioned before that, can you imagine being there when something like that is happening, and how, awestruck you'd maybe be, and so I think, again, as we talked about, how much were they digesting at the time versus then looking back and going, holy cow, and comparing, can you believe that happened, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so obviously we talk about a large part of this podcast is, taking these readings and applying it to modern day. So with, the disciples being able to see that and, basically having their minds blown, is where do we see something like that in today's world? At least an initial thought for me would be, I think of, again, coming back to the current pandemic, is this quick turnaround. Like I believe I read something that, the foundations of this, of the vaccine that they're coming out with, was kind of already in the works for a few years. People were working on something similar and they were able to apply it. But the fact that they were able to, get together and turn around something so quickly to help try and get us through is maybe an initial thought, but and that's a large scale, but either building off of that or even a small scale daily life, where do we see something similar in today's world?
Yeah, I think you mentioned before your sister actually, and surviving for this, and as a little girl and going through this in her whole life. And I think that's incredible. And you think about all the other examples in your life of people really just doing something that you just never thought was possible. And so I often wrestle with, okay, well, so is that a miracle of God, or is that, kind of a miracle? The miracle of God is the medical ability of all the people working to make her, to make her good health outcome happen. And, which is it, an individual miracle from God, or is it this a never-ending miracle, if you will, of the world as a whole, and kind of that, go out into the world and make a difference in the world, and that kind of thing. And so I wrestle with both of those, and I'm more of the miracle of God is sending us all into the world and making a difference, and as opposed to an individual instance of someone who laid hands on someone and they got well, so that. And I know a lot of people, kind of wrestle with that in a lot of different ways, but I look at that as the bigger miracle, if you will, setting people to work to help the rest.
Yeah, I think I would agree that I would view it more as the ongoing miracle, I guess, of everybody coming together. And it makes me think of dominoes, where it's just one thing knocking into the next, and it gets bigger and bigger, and you just get, this huge image or something, this big beautiful picture at the end after everything's as everything's progressing. And I think that is that, the miracle being God giving each of us our own unique or specific talents or purpose that we kind of came into the world for, and all those coming together into various instances.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I kind of agree with that, and both things that I think defining miracle and understanding miracles is challenging, and I do look at it in a lot of different ways, but I tend to think of it as a holistic thing, like you're saying, like the miracle of, God gave us our brains, and these people are using their brains and working together and coming up with the vaccine, and working together and helping people and working to get it out, and helping people get better. And I don't know, I kind of look at it that way too.
Yeah, the conservative Christian would look at everything coming together, everybody's input, and simply say, praise the Lord.
Yeah. So this brings up one that I always wrestle with, and that is this predestination versus this, this God setting us all, spinning us off and kind of setting us on our way to interact and for us to positively change the world versus the concept of everything in your life is already predestined sort of thing, which I have a lot of trouble with. But so one of the things I think about when I think about miracles is, okay, something when I think about what's read here where he's casting demons out of individuals. When I think of that, I think of our positive impact in the world, and I don't always think. I do have friends that really believe that if they pray hard enough, someone's cancer or whatever goes away, as opposed to when I think about prayer, I think about helping us deal with what God's plan really is, as opposed to changing that plan based on what I want now. And I know God says no a lot, and probably for my own good, like half the time. So, but anyway, so those are just things I wrestle with around.
When I was younger, as a scientist, I would wrestle with, oh, well, that couldn't really have happened. It's a nice metaphor, but and I understand the message that they're trying to get across here, but it really couldn't have happened. But today, I'm still a scientist, and I still read a lot of science books, and I'm still involved in many discussions with scientists, and I believe they are miracles. I believe they are things that happen that are triggered from outside our reality. Now, sometimes scientists would agree with that, and some scientists would not agree with that. But I happen to now fall into the category, after wrestling with it for a long time, that I agree with it. And people will say, okay, well, God is really in nature. God is really all around us. God is part of what we do. God is the earth. And that's not what Christians believe. Christians believe that there is a God outside of our reality, outside of our existence. And when I heard the parallel of the potter, the potter can make a beautiful work of art, make the pot, turn the clay on the table and make the pot, make a vase or make a cup. But the potter isn't the vase. He's not in the vase. He can shape the vase, but he's not the vase. And that's one way to look at God outside, but can interact with our existence. So I said to myself, why not? And then one of the pieces of information that just struck me as I understood it, and it just took me a long time to understand it, but it's so simple. As a scientist, much of what we understand and know are theory. We as scientists propose theories, and the theory stays a theory until it's knocked down. But there is always something short of perfect, proven reality. There's always a little bit of leap of faith, even in science, as there is in faith. We don't have a perfect understanding of the workings of all the materials and laws and rules. And laws are laws until they fall apart. It took a long time for Einstein's theories to overrule Newton's theories. And now some of Einstein's theories are in question when you build in some of the new theories of quantum mechanics. So they all don't explain 100%, and there's a little bit of leap of faith, even by the scientists. Now, many scientists say, I understand, and I can be a person of faith and a scientist. And some scientists say, no, that's not true. And they dismiss it out of hand and won't even discuss it. Well, it's too bad, because they don't get the perspective of both sides. They're unwilling to discuss the perspective of both sides. But in fact, they have a leap of faith as well. So it's very interesting when you start having this discussion with scientists and people who really understand what science is and what science isn't. I recently finished just a marvelous book. It was a book from a friend of mine who is an astronomer, and he loaned me the book, and it was called The Physics of the 20th Century. And it really started out with the history of physics in the late 1800s, because it built into the 1900s and then went up through the last part of the 1990s. And what really astounded me in there, and I knew many of the theories, was so many of the theories that have come and gone, and they were popular in the day for 10, 20 years, from great scientists, great physicists, but yet they faded away. They were just a theory that didn't hold up. That's what science is. Science holds up until someone proves it can't. And then you modify it and you move on. That's the wonderful thing about science, okay? It evolves. There's never really the final truth until you find that final truth. But we're finding even some of the final truths we now hold, or we thought we held as absolutes, are being questioned with new concepts of quantum mechanics and quantum electrodynamics. Whoa.
I have a really funny one of those. So for 100 years, people thought really followed the theory of spontaneous generation. So in the 1700s, all the way until the pretty late in the 1800s, there was a theory that if there were it was garbage in a corner, that it would turn into a rat. Now, it took a while before someone realized there's a hole around the corner where the rat lived, and it came out and ate garbage. But that was a theory, a scientific theory for 100 years before people kind of figured out that, oh, no, maybe it's not. So I think that's where we all, as Christians and people of science in many cases, really, I think, should spend more time kind of, trying to marry the two and figure out, as I think Dick said, that they go together and spend a little more time doing that, as opposed to kind of surface-oriented ones. And I think that's maybe a good message for this week, is to go out and really make an effort in that way.
Yeah, if you are happy just skimming over it and not solving those issues or unanswered questions in the back of your mind, you'll never dig into it and settle them. When you do, okay, that's when you start thinking about the hard issues and do some deep thinking. You have to watch out on the other side of the coin as well. There's been many cases where people will say, okay, science goes only so far and can't explain the rest. Therefore, there must be a God. That's been called in recent years God of the gaps. Well, if there's a gap in science, then it proves God exists. Not necessarily. Now, I'm a Christian, okay, but you have to watch out for that, because I'm also a scientist. Because many of those gaps have been filled with scientific explanation over the years. So Christians can make a fool of themselves by stating too strongly, well, because this isn't explained by science, that proves there's a God. Not necessarily. You know, one of the interesting things is the Vatican has been involved in science, astronomy, and cosmology for hundreds of years. They don't shy away from science. And it is actually Christianity that has fostered modern scientific thinking. With modernity, with the modern view that science ends all, everything is materialism. It grew out of the Enlightenment. And of course, then the postmodern world said, no, that's not really true. There's, you know, you can have your truth, I can have my truth. And I'm boiling it down to the simple aspects of it. And of course, we're going all through those stages, you know, and now we're even into the stage of New Age. So all of that can fool you unless you think about it critically, think about it deeply, you study it, you read about it. And that's what we're trying to do tonight. Talk about it, read about it, you know, study it.
So what's our mission for the week, Evan?
Well, I guess before that, we've really focused on just the first half of the reading. We didn't really even talk about Jesus, you know, going to pray in a solitary place. But I mean, my thought of going off to a solitary place is, I mean, I know I like going off and having alone time just to be able to contemplate and get away from a lot of craziness. But I don't know if, you know, anyone else has any other things they'd like to touch on that.
Do we think that Jesus needed to recharge his batteries like we do, right? I mean, after all, it was God become human. And so he had been healing people and people were all around him, and he needed to, you know, get away for a little bit and be in quietness, as opposed to, you know, is that what that's really saying, or what are we thinking?
Well, my take on it is exactly that. As Christians, we believe that God sent himself, in this case, his son, to change the paradigm, okay, to get people to listen. Jesus is so profoundly human. He's so much like us, okay, that we see traits of him needing to be recharged, of him needing to talk to his Father, and needing to pray, needing to be by himself. And yet, you know, we see him so profoundly God in the miracles he works. So I think you're exactly right that.
All right, so we want to talk about, you know, the takeaway or the marching orders for the week. I mean, one thing may not necessarily a marching order, but for getting people to kind of share with us, you know, either within the YouTube comments or through social media with, you know, Prince of Peace Lutheran Church in Westlake, is, you know, maybe what are your experiences, or how do you see, or where have you seen, you know, your Christian faith marry up with science in various places, whether it's medicine or if it's elsewhere. What have been your experiences? Or on the flip side of the solitary place, have you gone somewhere that has let you to recharge? And, you know, what is that place? We'd love to hear your thoughts on everybody's thoughts through that, or listening or watching, kind of what you've seen or where you've been to. But marching orders, I mean, so obviously I think a standing order, no matter what, trying to take the time to take that solitary time to recharge. And maybe on the other side, and obviously anyone feel free to jump in if you have ideas too. An initial thought being, maybe see if you can find a way that, I mean, okay, we're not all doctors or nurses or medical professionals, but what is a way that you can help others around you to heal? And maybe seeing if there's a way, something you can do, whether again, it can be something small, whatever that may be, and it doesn't have to be something, a physical healing, but take a look around at your life and see if there's small ways that even just throughout your day you can help others to heal from whatever they may be going through.
Yeah, and I would second that. You know, with COVID-19, the one secondary symptom that we're all feeling is loneliness. And there are a lot of people out there that have been alone, a lot more alone than they're used to this whole pandemic. And so just a smile and a wave and a hi and an opportunity to kind of share a little bit with them will go a long way.
Yeah, there's
So,
a whole new depth of cabin fever, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, less out there in Arizona, Dick. A little more out here in Cleveland.
Exactly.
Yeah, so as we go through, you know, obviously we'd love to hear from everybody on your experiences from where you're seeing science and faith meet up, or what your favorite spot has been to help recharge.
And if anybody has any miracles that they would like to send in and share, I think that would be something really interesting to read.
Yeah, thanks for that, Ben. Yeah, absolutely. Any miracles that you've seen? I mean, again, whether it's medical or if it's anything else, we'd love to hear from everybody. So again, either in the comments, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can find us through various social medias, I think primarily Facebook and Instagram, with Prince of Peace Lutheran Church in Westlake, Ohio. And if you have any other feedback, if there's something you'd like us to talk about, or if there's someone you'd like us to have on, we'd like to hear from you. And obviously we're going every week, and we like talking to new people when we can. So thanks again for joining us, and keep wrestling.